What's going on in Melbourne, Perth Hills, and Sydney right now? Could this situation escalate to the point where travel to Australia becomes restricted again? What sparked such intense unrest that has people so riled up? Stick with us until the end of this video to find out. On August 25th, massive protests led by Australian locals broke out in several major cities, targeting immigration policies and migrant communities. These demonstrations took place in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Canberra, and Perth Hills, driven by groups advocating for stricter immigration controls. At the same time, counter-protests emerged, led by migrant communities in Australia who opposed the anti-immigration movement. On September 1st, tensions boiled over into large-scale clashes between these two groups. Reports indicate that police intervention was needed to manage the situation, with riot control units deployed in some areas. These events have drawn global attention. The protests, rallying under the slogan "Stop Mass Immigration," have continued to gain momentum among some Australian locals. Meanwhile, counter-protesters, including migrant groups and their supporters, along with some authorities, are pushing back, condemning the movement. Clashes between the two sides have already been reported, and the situation remains heated. Under the banner March for Australia, these protests have been labeled by the Australian government as racially charged. Multicultural Affairs Minister Dr. Anne Ully has publicly called the movement a new face of Nazism in media statements. Critics point out that the protests appear to target non-white migrant communities specifically, while sparing white immigrants from similar scrutiny. This has led international governments and observers to condemn the protests as racially motivated, accusing them of undermining humanitarian principles. So far, protest organizers have not directly responded to these accusations. According to Australian media, around 5,000 to 8,000 protesters, many waving national flags, gathered in Melbourne, with another 5,000 in Sydney. These large gatherings led to significant unrest, requiring police to deploy riot control units. Several individuals have reportedly been arrested for failing to comply with police orders. One side argues the protests are unjust, while others, particularly some local Australian groups, claim their justified defense of their everyday rights and freedoms. Protesters argue that mass immigration has strained social cohesion, infrastructure, and resources. The protesters' perspective, as stated on their websites and social media, is that they're taking a stand on an issue politicians lack the courage to address. They claim their core demand is to halt mass immigration, viewing these protests as a first step toward that goal. On the other hand, authorities and critics argue that Australia's multicultural identity is under threat. Dr. Anne Ully has emphasized that these protests negatively impact Australia's diverse cultural fabric and national identity. The unrest has highlighted broader challenges. Some Australians argue that immigration has led to issues like traffic congestion, housing shortages, strained water supplies, and difficulties accessing healthcare. They also cite concerns about environmental degradation, cultural erosion, and competition for resources. These grievances have fueled the March for Australia movement, with protesters calling for stricter immigration controls. Some even demand that migrants return to their countries of origin, a stance critics call unfair, arguing that migrants who follow the laws and contribute to society should not face such hostility. Glenn Alchin has suggested tightening immigration laws and pausing migrant intake for several years. However, Australia has a long history of immigration, with people arriving from Europe, Asia, and even Vietnam during the Vietnam War era. Despite this, some responsible voices warn of rising extremism in Australia, expressing concern about the protests' impact. With nearly half the population either born overseas or having at least one parent born abroad, resolving this issue is complex and unlikely to be settled easily. The Australian government has voiced its disapproval, condemning the protests as violent and unacceptable. Dr. Ully has reiterated that such actions threaten Australia's multicultural ethos. Meanwhile, protesters maintain that their movement is a legitimate response to the pressures of immigration. They argue that the influx of people has strained infrastructure, from roads to hospitals, and disrupted the daily lives of locals. On the flip side, it's worth noting that migrants contribute significantly to Australia's economy. They make up a substantial portion of the workforce in industries like construction, business, and hospitality. With an aging population, Australia relies on young, skilled migrants to drive economic growth. Cultural diversity also enriches society, fostering innovation and global connections. Despite being the world's largest island, Australia has a relatively small population, and immigration has historically fueled its development. Critics of the protests argue that blaming migrants for economic or resource issues is misguided, with some even calling the movement a resurgence of xenophobic ideologies. The protests have already strained Australia's international relations, with global criticism mounting over the treatment of migrant communities. Authorities have advised migrants to avoid public spaces for safety reasons due to the ongoing unrest. If you found this video informative, don't forget to hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. If you haven't already, subscribe to our channel and click the bell icon to stay updated on our latest videos.